Okay, so the next presidency that we want to talk about is the Clinton administration, and he served 2 terms. He was the first election I voted in, if that gives you any indication of timing, and I was in college at the time. In 1993, he defeated George H.W. Bush by focusing on the economy. If you recall that during this time period, there had been a recession. And he focused on the economy. He was kind of a come out of nowhere candidate. No one had heard about. I had not heard about Bill Clinton before the Democratic primary process, but he was a Southern Democrat who was kind of an Andrew Jackson figure in the sense that he was extremely smart and highly intellectual, but also kind of had a Southern accent and could kind of identify with middle class and lower middle class people. Um, and he sympathized with them and their economic problems. And he appealed to a lot of swing voters because he's not a typical Democrat. He did not take typical Democratic positions. We'll talk more about that. So, for example, increasingly liberals had come out against the death penalty, but President Clinton or Bill Clinton actually was for the death penalty. He also did not in any way want to involve himself in gun control. So pro-death penalty, pro-gun Southerners were not particularly threatened by him. Also, he wanted to reform welfare, and that had typically been a Republican position to try and shrink the size of entitlement programs like welfare. And he also said he wanted a balanced budget, and Democrats by this point had kind of had a reputation of being high tax, big spender politicians, and he ran in direct opposition to that. He actually won pretty decisively to everyone's surprise. He won 43% to 37% of the popular vote. There was also, those numbers might look a little low to you, because there was also a third-party candidate named Ross Perot who ran as an independent that did siphon off some of the vote. In terms of his policies at home, his first priority was health care reform. We had, since Truman, had been trying to come up with a health care system that would provide health insurance to everyone in American society. The catch is this: old people have access to health care insurance as a result of Medicare. Poorer people through Medicaid. Middle class people only have health insurance if they are employed and their employer provides benefits. What that meant is that there were a lot of lower income or lower middle class people who didn't get benefits with their jobs, and so they put off going to the doctor because they would have to pay the entire amount out of their pockets, and therefore they would not get the health care they needed. Then their small problems, healthcare problems, became big healthcare problems. They would arrive at emergency rooms and need emergency treatment as a result of delaying doctor visits, and then they would be unable to pay their hospital bills. They would declare bankruptcy, and then the hospitals would be left holding the bill, and that's why at a hospital a Tylenol can cost you $30, is they would pass on the cost of unpaid bills to everyone else. So it was Bill Clinton's idea that we can't be a first-rate nation until we all have health care coverage that allows us to get the screenings we need and prevent illness by going to the doctor when we need. That was his first priority. His goal was for everyone in America to have health care insurance. The problems that he had actually trying to achieve that were many. One is he tried to take his, and the Obama administration, who eventually succeeds at this task, they learn a lot how not to do things based on how Clinton tried to do things. First of all, they decided to not involve pharmaceutical companies at the beginning, not involve doctors, not involve insurance companies, but get some kind of a brain trust of people together and go in a back room and come up with a comprehensive plan and then present it to the world. Well, that gave doctors and insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies a lot of time to get very nervous and decide that it'd be better to just oppose anything rather than take a risk of waiting to see what they came up with. So all these commercials started airing, sponsored by different interest groups, before the plan was even presented, scaring people about the plan. Also, that took too much time and gave them more time to build people's opposition to the plan that had not yet been unveiled. And then thirdly, he put his wife in charge of the plan. And the Clintons always saw the election of Bill Clinton as kind of a 2-for-1 deal, like, hey, you get me and you get my awesome wife too. And Hillary Clinton certainly was a very accomplished lawyer and child advocate and knew a lot about the issues. But a lot of people did not, they thought, we didn't elect Hillary Clinton. and they were not sure why the president's unelected wife was in charge of his major domestic policy initiative. She kind of had a slip up early on in the campaign, too, of alienating conservatives. She at first did not change her last name. She hyphenated it, and she had said some things that kind of ruffled the feathers of stay-at-home moms. And so conservatives were already kind of on an anti-Hillary slant before even the president installed her in this position. So at any rate, it fails to pass. They're only able to get a program to protect children passed, and that baton will be passed to the Obama administration, who will eventually achieve that Healthcare Reform Act, and that is called Obamacare, and we'll talk more about that in class. Amazingly, Bill Clinton balances the budget. He's the only president since, definitely since Reagan, that balances the budget. And he kind of just drew a lucky hand, just as Carter and Ford drew an unlucky hand with stagflation. President Clinton had the internet boom happen on his watch, and there was all kinds of new marketing opportunities and businesses established, and they could be taxed, and so that brought in tax revenues. At the same time, he's going to cut welfare benefits to the welfare rolls are going to drop by 50%, and that cuts government spending. And so the combination of those things, plus his willingness to not have all of the programs he promised in the campaign, led him to actually balance the budget. And in a miraculous turn of events, we actually started paying back the debt for a couple years during the Clinton administration. That has not happened since. In terms of welfare reform, he wanted to work with Republicans. Republicans are going to take over the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. And there's not a lot that they agree on, but there is one thing they can work together on, and that is reforming welfare. They wanted people who receive cash payments each month to help care for their dependent children. He wanted them to be required to work once their children were school age. They also put a maximum years you can receive benefits. The reform became known as the temporary relief families. Temporary assistance for needy families was the name of it. So the first name of the new welfare program is temporary. The idea is that you should not be on it your whole lifetime. And so they set a maximum of 5 years you can be on welfare, and that cut the number of people on welfare in time in half. So one thing, though, that we've noticed since then is that a lot of those people have left the welfare program, but many of them have migrated to the Social Security Disability Program. So those numbers aren't quite as cheery as they might appear on the screen. We also saw the rise of domestic and foreign terrorism, and it started with President Clinton when some white militants, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who were American citizens, they were kind of an anti-government militia. They were sympathetic to kind of white militant militias who hate the growth of the federal government. And they actually bombed the federal government building in Oklahoma City. 168 people died, 800 people were injured. There was actually a daycare center in the bottom floor of the building, and many children were killed. Eventually, Terry Nichols was an informant against Timothy McVeigh, and Timothy McVeigh was executed for this. But it did help the federal government see how they could be a target and were susceptible to domestic terrorist attacks. We also saw the rise of similar types of violence that happened at Columbine High School in Colorado. Two students, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, they went into their high school in Colorado, and they opened fire on students there, killing two of them. Two students killed 12 students and a teacher in a shooting rampage. That led us to understand how we needed to make our schools more secure, and that led to things that we have today in school, like lockdown drills and those things to protect us against random acts of violence. It also gave more attention to bullying. For example, in North Carolina, we've passed an anti-bullying law. Some people would say that effort began here, and focusing on how to make sure teens are not isolated. Most people think the World Trade Center attacks happened only in 2001. Most people forget that it was during the Clinton administration in 1993 that an al-Qaeda terrorist cell attacked the World Trade Center with a parking lot bomb. 6 people were killed and over 1,000 people were injured. And had we been connecting the dots and paying attention, we would have realized that we were very susceptible to continued terrorist attacks like those that took place in 2001 that killed over 3,000 people, with those attacks at the World Trade Center being the most people killed in one location. So the global fight against terrorism kind of was really starting to percolate during the Clinton administration and will reach its apex in President George W. Bush's one. Like I said, the president did not get along with Congress too well because the Republicans won control of Congress just 2 years after Clinton became president. And their Speaker of the House was named Newt Gingrich, and he had his own separate agenda that was very different from Clinton's agenda that he wanted to pass. They called it the Contract with America. This actually led to the first time that the president and the Congress were so divided over the budget that they shut the government down because they could not compromise and sign a budget. The Republicans, that round of government shutdowns, got blamed, and many thought that Clinton came out on top of that wrestling match, and he was reelected in 1996. Throughout his first campaign and his whole administration, there had been a steady drumbeat of the fact that the president had been involved in infidelities against his wife and corruption of some sort. In fact, before his first election, there was a woman named Jennifer Flowers who came forward and said she'd had a 10-year-long relationship with the president, and he denied it, and then she produced tapes from her home answering machine that showed that, in fact, the president had been making inappropriate plans with her. And he had to fess up and admit that he had lied, and him and Hillary went on 60 Minutes and said, we understand that we have disappointed the nation, but we have had problems in our marriage and we have moved on. And everyone kind of, oh, okay, yeah, we all understand, and things went forward. It was after that he had invested in a vacation property in Colorado, him and Hillary with another couple. And the question became whether they had properly paid their taxes and reported all of the money that had been gained and lost in those investments. And then there was a woman who said when he was governor that she had been sexually harassed by him in a hotel room. Her name was Paula Jones. And that the highway patrol had arranged for her to come to Bill Clinton's hotel room where he exposed himself and sexually harassed her. The Republicans in Congress decide that all of this is worthy of a special investigator, and that special investigator's name is Ken Starr. And he begins interviewing people to see if he can find any evidence to support these allegations. A woman in the government named Linda Tripp says, well, yeah, I have something to say. My younger friend, Monica Lewinsky, has called me on many occasions and mentioned that she is having a sexual relationship with the president. Bill Clinton denied this, and Linda Tripp said, oh, well, it just so happens that I have taped the conversations that Monica and I have had. This leads them to depose the president under oath, which is where lawyers meet with him and ask him questions. And in front of the press as well, Clinton denied having an inappropriate relationship with Monica Lewinsky. In fact, he said, I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky said, yes, she did. He said, no, I didn't. She said they were both under oath, claiming that the other person was lying. In the end, we find out that the president was lying. Monica Lewinsky has some rather convincing evidence to prove her point that eventually forces, we could talk more about this in class, but it forces the president to admit that he actually did have an inappropriate relationship with Monica Lewinsky. This leads Congress to impeach the president for perjury, and we have a national debate about whether the president's love life and lying about his sexual peccadillos is really worthy of him losing his job, since it wasn't against the Constitution, it was just him lying under oath. Also, there's some question about whether he actually did lie under oath. We can talk more about that in class. At any rate, he is found not guilty. He does get to keep his job, but his reputation is very much stained, and the case is never tried in the federal courts because they don't think that they really have a case. The other major thing going on in foreign policy is the Cold War is over and the war against terror has not started. So we have a couple things that we're involved in. We're involved in peacekeeping troops in Yugoslavia, and we sent troops to Somalia to try and put down a civil war. For both of these things, Clinton was criticized, and people said that that's not the reason the military is around. They're around to fight wars, not keep peace. But he did them anyway. He also signed a free trade agreement that removed all the tariffs between us and Mexico and Canada. It made goods cheaper for everyone, but it also moved a lot of jobs to Mexico, and unemployment went up. As a result, by the time his 2 terms were over, Al Gore, his vice president, decided to run for president, and he will be challenged by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, and we'll be talking about the controversial election of 2000 in the next split video. So, thanks a lot. See you soon.